Hey everyone, I'm Zach Seward, co-founder and CEO of Words. Welcome to Make Business Better, our show to talk to executives in different parts of the business world who are trying to make their section of the business world just a little bit better, and more importantly, are willing to come on this show and share some of those stories, insights, and lessons with all of us. For today's episode, I'm lucky to have the CEO of Deloitte US, Joe Ucuzoglu, who's joining us today, and I'll bring him on right now. Joe, thank you so much for for joining us.
Privileged to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Zach.
Uh, Joe, you started your career at Deloitte. Is that correct? How long has it been so far at the company?
I did, Zach. I joined as an intern in college, so about a quarter century ago. One of the things I'm sure we'll talk about is perspectives on staying at one organization versus moving around. I will acknowledge I'm a bit biased. I've had a phenomenal career and feels like I've had multiple careers within one firm that I care about very much.
Yeah, I mean, I actually do want to talk about that and would be interested to hear about your own experience. You became CEO of Deloitte US in mid 2019.
Correct.
So I also want to hear about how that ran right up, how your expectations of what that job was going to be ran right into a pandemic, not 9 months later. But we'll get to all of that. If you're right, the first place I wanted to start was the state of the labor market, and we might as well focus primarily on the U.S. given your role, and so we can get as specific as possible. I mean, the bottom line, as you well know, as you just referenced, is that there are fewer and fewer folks like you, or more and more folks in the private sector in the U.S. And why don't we bring on that chart for a second right now, who are, well, a huge portion are looking for other jobs. It's hard to estimate, hard to get an accurate estimate of that, but I've seen estimates as high as 40% of all U.S. private sector workers looking, considering moving jobs. But the quit rate, actually quitting their job, has just has been rising since a brief plummet at the start of the pandemic, as you well know. What is going on here? Tell us the human story behind the data in this chart.
The data in the chart isn't a surprise to any of us leading organizations. It's just a confirmation of what we see on the ground every day in terms of an incredibly competitive market for talent. There is, though, a lot of good in this. When you ask, well, what's behind the phenomena? Why is the rate up substantially on such an upward trajectory? There's really two primary phenomena. One, we have a booming economy, particularly in the knowledge space. The pandemic has accelerated trends relative to digitizing. Companies are making big investments with a pretty bright outlook. It takes people to bring all of that to life. Two, one of the reasons that people stay with an organization is because they feel a deep sense of connection. They're part of something. They believe in the mission. And it's probably not a huge surprise that coming on the heels of 18 months of primarily remote work in the white collar space, that some of those connections are frayed. And as a result, the potential that someone would consider moving elsewhere is increased. All of that said, what you have now is a market where people have great alternatives. That's a good thing. And organizations have an imperative to re-recruit their own people to make certain that they're offering the most valuable talent proposition. And who is ultimately the net winner is a source of huge differentiation relative to having the team to take full advantage of an incredibly bright marketplace.
Yeah, I want to get into how companies are responding to this trend in a second, and we could take the chart down for now. But first and foremost, I think an important distinction is that we need to make is, are we looking at a one-time correction, sort of pent-up demand coming out of the pandemic, as you were just putting it, or potentially a longer-term trend where quit rates stay elevated and maybe like average tenures at firms continues to decline as it has been. Fewer and fewer people in your boat spending 25 years at the same company. How do you see it?
We are at the very early stages of a fundamental reordering in terms of how society goes about work, where the work is done, views as to length of time to spend with a particular employer. And so none of us should be confident in making some long-term prognostication. If you had to ask me my best expectation, it would be that the answer will lie somewhere in the middle, that we're a bit anomalous on the high side, but previously we were probably at a low point, and that this will settle somewhere in the middle. And it will depend upon companies being able to demonstrate a value proposition to their workforce and a real investment in their development that makes people want to stay and sees the value of a long-term career path and succeeding within a particular organization, as opposed to constantly hopping around. But that's on us to make certain that we demonstrate why that's a good thing for our professionals.
Yeah, so let's start with the staying. Obviously, we'll get to what companies are doing to take advantage of the situation. It's such a robust hiring market, that or a lot of great talent out there to secure. And I want to talk about what incentives companies are using in that respect. But starting with retaining one's own employees, I got up in front of courts as staff a few months ago to address, a higher than usual attrition within the company, and said, let's be real. There's not a single person at courts, nor in the whole world, who's not like looking for some kind of a reset in their life right now. And since work's such a huge portion of people's lives, that's gonna, looking for a reset at work makes total sense, or just a renewed sense of purpose, or just something to be different than it's been for the month and a half, a year and a half of the pandemic. And my message was, I want as many people as possible to be able to find that reset within courts. We're smaller companies, certainly than Deloitte. So a little easier for me to say that than you. But does that resonate with you? And more importantly, I mean, it's easy enough for me to say everyone needs to find their reset. What are the kinds of ways that you're seeing, either within Deloitte or companies you advise, that the companies are finding a way to give their staff that reset or reinvention to keep the reinvention of their job, to keep them there?
That message does resonate. And there's no doubt that coming out of a period where many people's lives have been difficult, and that's not universal across the board. There are some who have thrived and have told me that their well-being is better than ever. They feel more physically fit, less travel. So there is no across-the-board answer, but there are many for whom that's not the case, and for whom the past 18 months has been really difficult when you combine the sense of isolation, the family circumstances, the sort of navigating of remote school, and caring for vulnerable parents. It's been hard. And you're right, in that environment, people were just desperate for some reset, some change that's going to make things better. That is not a good reason to change jobs. There may be very good reasons to change jobs, but change for the sake of change, actually, in some cases, we're seeing people who have done that come back to their prior employer when they figure out that the grass really isn't greener. But so then the question becomes, how do you actually demonstrate that you're going to get that reset within your current employer? And the most successful organizations are doing that by providing a holistic talent experience that's grounded in purpose, where people feel a genuine sense of, I believe in the impact of my work. I believe that what I'm doing day to day is actually positively contributing to society. That has to be at the core. They want to see from their employer an enormous focus on well-being, on making certain that there's a true balance and that they're being invested in, that they have benefits relative to mental health needs, relative to supporting investments in themselves, physical activity, relative to childcare support, flexible policies around caregiving. All of that stuff becomes increasingly important in the world that we're living in. And then you have a healthy dose of, how are you as an employer going to make sure I as an employee are being developed to progress, or being provided with the sets of opportunities and the underlying skills to thrive in a tech-driven world. And those who can provide that vision, those who can demonstrate an investment in upskilling, an investment back into people, that employer is the place where the individual is ultimately going to grow and thrive in an economy that is transforming drastically. Those are the employers that are both succeeding in retaining their current people and attracting in new people who are amongst this population at other employers that are looking for potential alternatives.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm hearing, two key principles. One being sense of purpose in the work, and the other like a clear career growth path through learning development programs and just clarity of how it is you grow at the company, and maybe seeing that's actually happening with your peers. The latter makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, there's a lot to talk about how to set up a great L&D program, but I wanted to get a little bit more on the former, a shared sense of purpose, in part because it's something we talk a lot about here at Courts, both in our coverage. We champion mission-driven companies. I think that is really crucial, and internally at Courts, our mission in 3 words is to make business better, and like that we're trying to be real about everything we do being directed toward that goal. But at the end of the day, like words like purpose and mission and taglines are only so much. I want to hear how the companies that are doing it well end up actually fostering a sense of mission. I guess what I'm saying is I sometimes see it as just this top down that like sort of one coat of paint over the company with the word mission attached, and that's obviously not going to work. But any companies that you're seeing like really working on shared sense of purpose with employees in an effective way?
Zach, I'm incredibly appreciative that you're driving this conversation broadly, and you're helping shine a spotlight on this and make certain that it's a priority across the business landscape, because I am a huge believer that business channeled effectively plays an incredibly important role in advancing society more broadly. But you're absolutely right. Sort of a few slogans or empty words, or saying I'm purpose driven, people look right through that. It's actually counterproductive, because then when people see the organization doesn't live up to those words, it makes things even worse. Maybe I'll start with what doesn't work and what I have seen that's not working well. When that is viewed as something that's like the responsibility of a department, that you have the purpose department or the social responsibility division that goes and hosts some events and contributes some dollars to worthy causes, that's not what we're talking about here. That stuff's actually good and important, but it is the minority of the impact. To get this right, you actually have to drive this into the core of your everyday business. How do you go out and source talent in an inclusive fashion and create opportunities for all communities? How do you build purpose into the core work that you do for your customers? So if you look at Deloitte, we are so proud of the impact that we've had in our core services during the course of the pandemic, whether it's keeping the capital market strong, ensuring that the economy can continue growing and thriving, being part of the response in terms of supporting the healthcare ecosystem to transport critical supplies, to get vaccines distributed, to address issues of health equity. And that stuff is so important. It's energizing to our people. They want to not only know they're going to have a vibrant career themselves, but that the work that they're doing is going to make a difference. And I'd even argue that it's more important in the world going forward, because going back to that point of one of the things that keeps people at their organization is a sense of connection. Well, in a world where we're going to have less in-person interaction going forward, and we can debate exactly where that settles out, but it's going to be a whole lot less than it used to be. So in a world where people aren't necessarily deriving connection to their organization as much from in-person co-location, what's going to take the place? What's going to be the glue that connects people to their organization? And I would argue that purpose is a big piece of it. That believing in the mission, that feeling like you're part of an organization that's doing good becomes even more critical in a world where physical co-location is much less.
Yeah, I agree with that. What is that? What does that look like in the last year at Deloitte? Just, you said, rightly proud of a lot of the work done for clients during the pandemic. Does that look like talking about it more, more frequently and in different ways than you might have otherwise internally? Like how does that shared sense of purpose actually get formed and created?
It's more about doing it.
Sure,
The,
but I have a
the,
sense,
the,
but you were doing that work before, right? So,
the reality is that, people's experiences are formed more so by what they are personally involved in than what they might, hear in a newsletter. And so, yes, we want to make sure that the organization surfaces these stories up, that we inspire each other by sharing what each of us are involved in. But our people want to be involved themselves. They want to be involved on teams that are doing this important work. They want to understand how their personal day-to-day connects into the organization's broader mission. And so, yes, we want to share proudly the stories, but again, the day-to-day experience of an individual is going to shape their view of the organization more so than what they hear about others having done.
fair, right? Yes, there's I think a high risk of just words there coming off as hollow. Well, so flipping on the other side of the coin, we were just focusing a bit on retention of employees and growth of existing staff. But there's also fierce competition for talent in a lot of industries right now, as you know. What are you seeing out there among clients, or Deloitte competing against the other of the big four to um, should have put their best foot forward and really compete in what I would call a pretty unprecedented labor market?
Well, if you take a giant step back, the first thing I would focus on is how great it is that we're experiencing this huge boom in opportunity. And just think about, Zach, all of the chatter over the past several years as new technology has proliferated, and the fearful stories, the concerns that technology would eat up all the jobs and everything would become automated. And how fascinating is it that we're sitting here in an economy where innovation is exploding, where digital transformation is changing the underlying fabric of our economy, and that in fact, the opposite phenomena is happening. It's leading to more jobs. It's leading to more opportunities for people. And so we should be basking in the glory of an economy that's actually rewarding labor, where individuals are seeing more opportunity than less. Now, if you're in the shoes of an individual company, then the question is, how do you compete and how do you differentiate your platform? And you want to tie this to the broader secular trends in the marketplace more broadly. You want to tie this to being an organization where people are going to receive the upskilling, are going to receive the development. We've set up academies relative to cloud, relative to data analytics, cognitive, cyber, to upskill. And this also connects into how we create a more inclusive economy. Because if this economy only works for those who already have the elite skill sets and others feel like they're left out, it's just going to exacerbate the inequities. It's going to exacerbate the political tensions. And that's why commitment to reaching in and attracting talent from alternative sources, to committing to hire individuals, and then we take the responsibility for the upskilling. We take the responsibility for layering on the 21st century skill sets that are necessary to compete. And when people see they're going to be joining an organization that's investing back in them and investing in society inclusively, that is a powerful message to go along with all the other things we talked about earlier, relative to purpose, relative to well-being, relative to flexibility. Those things all have to operate in tandem.
How does that get factored in employee or potential employee decisions of joining a company relative to your standard set of perks like vacation time and your 401k and maybe free meals or whatever the company happens to offer? They're so different in kind, yet I would agree in many respects what you were just talking about, actual career development and growth is vastly more important than whether you get your a free hoodie or or a fancy just playground inside the office. So what's the like, do you see companies reevaluating those perks in the first place?
I would say the the perks, the comp, the benefits, the market kind of sets that stuff. We know about what the going rate is relative to the level of vacation and the level of salary and all of that kind of stuff. And of course, we have to be highly competitive. So then, in an environment where people have the opportunity to work for any number of organizations, and the standard stuff is relatively comparable, how do they decide which one gets the privilege of them joining? And that's where all the other stuff becomes the differentiator. Okay, I've checked the box that the comp's competitive. I've checked the box that the benefits are competitive. Now, where do I really believe in my own chance to contribute to something that I believe in, as well as the organization having a learning mindset, a development mindset that's really focused on my long-term career path? Because you're right, that stuff's more important. And people, particularly early in their career, you might have 35, 40 plus years in front of you. Too often you see decisions being made with a short-term lens. What's my job this week versus what's it going to be somewhere else next week? That is the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, what is the trajectory that I'm on? Which organization is going to help me be most successful to achieve my career aspirations 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out? That is far more impactful than a comparison of today to next week.
Yeah. Also, I think there's not enough comment on the fact that, you would say the labor's power is growing. That is true, I think, undeniably. But individuals sort of give up that power if they're switching jobs every 12 months versus trying to like consolidate and consolidate that power and make real change within the company that you already are at. Does that sound right to you, or
It does. Look, I know I'm probably a little biased. I joined Deloitte as an intern, and I've been a big believer in the cumulative benefit of a collective set of experiences and wisdom from remaining at a leading organization. And I feel like I probably had 10 different jobs within one firm. But the reality is that there is something to be said for accumulating experiences and becoming networked and growing an ecosystem within an organization is versus starting all over every 12 to 18 months. Even if you might get a little bit of a short-term benefit, that erodes. And we have a ton of evidence in terms of correlating long-term career outcomes to the length of tenure at an organization like Deloitte. You can imagine the close correlation between staying here longer and ultimately achieving greater long-term career outcomes. And that is not a coincidence.
No, there's got to be a little bit of survivorship bias embedded in there, but I do know what you mean, and certainly have seen that. Quartz is just 9 years old, but that certainly plays out here as well. I wanted to briefly touch on one last topic, which is the topic du jour: distributed work. But to do it, if you wouldn't mind, from Quartz's perspective, and I'd love to get some free advice from you. So Quartz, in the middle of the pandemic, we became a work from anywhere company, committed to do that for the long run, meaning our staff can work anywhere that we can legally employ people, and even if they're in the New York area where we have this lovely office, are welcome to use it or not as they choose. Different companies are taking different approaches, more hybrid, more conservative. Everybody's got to be in the office. But for those of us who are going the pretty radical work from anywhere approach, what am I likely missing? I feel good about how we handled it during the pandemic, but I know doing distributed work for the long term is a whole different ball game, and we need to change a lot of the ways we work as a company. What are some of the common mistakes that I should be looking out for?
Well, we'll learn from each other.
Sure.
And the reality, as I said earlier, is that we're in the early innings of a fundamental reordering of the way that society goes about incorporating work. And none of us know exactly how this is going to play out. And I'd commend you for experimenting and for empowering your people, for trusting your people to ultimately do the right mix of what's appropriate for each of them. At Deloitte, what we've been talking about, both with our own people as well as with our clients, is harnessing the best of both models of work. This is not an either or. We have learned a lot during the pandemic. People can be incredibly productive. They like the flexibility, much more quality of life consideration when you are able to work in a way that suits your own purpose, less travel, cutting down on the carbon footprint. There's all kinds of good stuff that is going to come from preserving a healthy dose of flexibility and work from home. At the same time, there's also stuff that matters to be together and co-located. You look at a profession like ours, where we're in a client service business, and some of the finer craft, the emotional intelligence, gets passed down in in-person interactions with your clients, with your colleagues, and many of our people are craving that. We actually reopened our corporate training facility, Deloitte University, which is a huge part of our culture, 800-room facility. We have people going this fall, and we offered it up completely voluntary. To your point, let's let people do what they're comfortable with and what's right for them. And the vast majority signed up and said, I want to go, because they view that as an important development experience for them. And what I love is when we have people starting to get back together for impactful moments with each other and their clients, because they're driving it, because they're comfortable and they see the value and they want to play a role in ultimately architecting the right balance for what makes sense for them and their own careers. And that's a beautiful thing.
I also hope that there's some reevaluation for client relationship driven businesses, and how much of that has to happen in person. I imagine that'll shake out over time
Indeed.
as well. Well, Joe, I really appreciate you taking the time, and good luck in navigating this uncertain but pretty exciting future over at Deloitte. And I hope we'll have you back on to talk about how it's going a year from now or so.
Zach, thanks for having me on, and thanks for everything that you and your team are doing.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. Well, that's it for today's episode of Make Business Better. We'll be back here in 2 weeks and every 2 weeks thereafter. And here is, well, depends where you're watching right now. LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, we're live streaming on each of those platforms. And of course, you can always watch the whole archive of the show afterwards, again, on any of those platforms. In the meantime, follow Quartz at qz.com. Sign up for the Quartz Daily Brief to start your morning. And I'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Thanks so much, everyone.